So in brief, the games industry has had a 25-year honeymoon where it only had to deal with two business models. One was shiny disc, cardboard box, ship it to the retailer. If it didn't come back in 48 hours, it was 96 to 98% sold through. That was the entire range of what it was. The other business model that was out there during that period was the MMO subscription model at $9.95 a month to $14.95. Then this industry got disrupted big time by F2P, and if you'll excuse some brief boasting, Chris and I were two of the lonely Western voices saying free-to-play is going to be a big deal in Western markets. And we made progress in 2010 at Game Developers Conference where people said, okay, it's going to work in Asia, Eric, but it'll never work in the West. We are now seeing another set of business models come into the equation. And Chris and I are going to review which ones are out there. They are all existing in some form or another. And essentially what we're offering you is an opportunity to pick up some of the money that is being left on the table. Chris, you want to talk briefly about the gathering storm?
Well, I think the thing that, you mentioned free-to-play, and I'll use a little bit of Ubisoft's background and why this talk is particularly, relevant for myself and for us. We got into mobile late. We had a good partnership with Gameloft for a long time. And we thought, all right, it's time to get into mobile now, so we took our premium games, we slapped them in the mobile. We said, you know what, this free-to-play thing is kind of big, so we just kind of made them free-to-play, and they didn't work pretty much at all. And so, that was the genesis of the concept that, hey, you probably need to change the game design to fit the business model. Now, I know that that's anathema to some folks who want to deliver a particular experience or a particular set of entertainment. And so to those people, I would say, you don't need to change the game design, just adjust it a little bit, right? And that's where Eric talks about getting the maximum revenue out of it. Because we had some games that were a little successful at that premium model. Not really, but it could have been. But once we started to modify it for the business model, it was much better.
Indeed. So the interesting thing is the other major entertainment media, movies, music, books, have all adjusted to multiple income streams. What's out there right now are ways to make more money off your existing games. But this has to start with at the game design level. Almost everyone who's been in the game industry even 10 years, not as long as I have been, they understand game design is important, that graphic design is important, that user experience design is important, and technical design is important. But revenue design is equally critical. So let's cover a couple ones, starting with subscription. Chris?
Yeah. So, subscription, you've heard it, Netflix of games. How many times, if you started indexing that over time, I would say in the last year it's become a huge topic, at least from a in conversation standpoint. But what does that really mean, the Netflix of games? So I'm going to do what Eric said, which is talk about the subscription model. And this is, it's not necessarily, a method of getting the game, it's how the customer pays for it. You pay one monthly fee, you get as much as you want. And is that great for you as developers? I think it's tough. It's clear that when you have that revenue model, right, there's only two ways that you're getting paid as a developer today, right? Maybe a slight third, but it's not working so much. Those two ways are either the exact Netflix model where the platform, the subscription company comes up to you and says, I'm going to write you a big fat check, and you're going to give me the rights to distribute your game for 3 years, right? And so if that works, then you're kind of done. There's only one company I know that's working with that model out there today. Most other subscription services say, we're going to give you a revenue share. And we're going to give you that share of what the customer pays after, of course, the platform takes their percentage off the top. And they're going to give you that share based on a couple things. Either the number of hours that your game is played compared to the number of hours that every other game is played. Or in some cases, they look at it at a session day basis too. right? So where, in other words, a player who plays for one session day counts as 1 point, if you want to think of it that way. And then you look at over the course of a given month, how does your session day stack up against everybody else's? And then they use that as a mechanism to then distribute the revenue, which makes sense a little bit when you think of it from the platform perspective, because what they're trying to do is drive acquisition.
Right, but the issue that you have is, one thing that's obvious, if you think about it a moment, if you're doing free-to-play or you're doing premium, subscription fights with both of those, because the reward that matters to your distributor is not the same thing that matters to you making money in the free-to-play or the premium model. And what becomes an issue is if you just deliver a pure free-to-play game or a pure premium game to a subscription service, they will essentially put you down in the rankings. Because they do not, what you're doing is trying to use their platform as an extra distribution point, and they're simply going to make sure that you get buried alive. So if you resist completely in working within their priorities, you will essentially probably not return the entire time that you had to negotiate the deal, unless it was signed this as a contract deal. Right,
and then the thing is, most of the time, what we've seen, at least from our experimentation in the field, is that those other revenue streams that you might get from the engagement, from microtransactions, people who are subscribing tend not to monetize as much as someone who would start off as a free-to-play. So if that direct free-to-play game goes in, you're not going to get the return on the back end as well. That said, there are things you can do with the design, knowing how you're being measured, at least from the revenue share perspective, that's going to help you, dare I say, game the system. Because if you know that you want to focus on session days, if the partner you're dealing with makes their revenue split on session days, then please figure out a way in your game design, whatever the game basis is to give the customer a really strong reason to come back every single day. Right? Now, you might think that that's a normal part of your transaction anyway. You want to build a habit, right? But when you realize that there's only 30 session days a month per player, and if you happen to get somebody to come back 15 days a month compared to somebody who comes back 5 times a month, you're going to get 3 times the revenue of that other company, even if it's a bigger game, even if it's a better name, or anything else like that. So I think that's where we talk about the game design. What game design how can you alter your game design to maximize the return that's going to come from that subscription?
Right, and the thing to keep in mind is that if they do by session days, if you have a game where you know that the optimum amount of time for you turning something free to play is, let's say, 20 to 25 minutes, those 20 to 25 minutes are taking time away from another game that might make it attractive to the subscriber. So that is one thing where you're literally fighting the service and you will end up losing. There are 2 exceptions to when you should just throw a game over the wall to a subscription service. One is when it's an old title, which is lying fallow, and if you pick up a few pennies, God bless you, it's going to sink to the bottom of the list, but the point is there's no cost to you for taking a game that essentially you don't sell anymore 5 years after it was first published.
Right, and you can see that content, that Netflix is full of that back content. Of course, nobody gets there anymore, but there's lots and lots of shows that fit that mix.
Right, Netflix has started to get rid of them, and actually what's interesting is now that Disney is taking away their content, they're now starting to say, wait a moment, remember that old content we got rid of? We want it back again because we've lost the big ones. And the other thing, of course, that's worth doing is if you have a major title, usually attaching to an IP, where they're willing to pay you to put your Star Wars game in a subscription service, which they use as a come-on, just as the same way that Netflix had been using an Avengers, a Marvel Comics movie to bring people in.
It's really about thinking about your partner and what they're looking for. Either they're looking for acquisition, like Eric said, so if you have a name or a game that's recognizable, they'll bring you in. Or if you build the habit with the customer, they just want to keep them subscribing month after month because you're building those session days or the play hours, then they're going to treat you better.
So there are 2 takeaways we would give you before we move on to the next one. One is, right now there are at least 4 subscription services that are rumored to be in the category of getting close to 1 million subscribers, which is, not a huge number relative to a $100 billion industry, but we promised you with some examples, and you don't have to, you can figure out who they are. In any event, when platforms get to a certain size, they basically all the leverage is with the platform. Once they have 25 to 50 million subscribers, you have to understand that you either work within their rules, or your game either gets accessed, as Netflix did with those old classic movies, or you simply don't make any money off it. And the second thing, which follows from that, is if you are going to a subscription service, Amazon and Netflix actually have shown very good examples of how subscriptions work. So if you're thinking of working with subscriptions, there are real-life examples that feed a couple 100 million people called Prime and Netflix. If you look from them, you can figure out some first principles on subscriptions. Again, the games industry is the least sophisticated of the major entertainment media. The great news that's an opportunity for you, because these are coming, and you don't have to invent the wheel. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, because you can look at examples that work. Let's go to the next one that gets cited as a business model: streaming. Chris?
So people talk about the streaming business model. And I would actually say that streaming is, in fact, not a business model. Streaming is a mechanism for delivering bits, the same way a CD is a mechanism for delivering bits. Now, you might have some design principles if you can take advantage of additional cloud compute that happens to be with your streaming partner. So you might change your game design, to do more things than it could if it was just running locally. But it's not a business model. At best, it's a market size increaser, so that people who have different devices, whether it be mobile or an old PC or something like that, can access your game that's running on a more powerful computer or running somewhere else. So you can increase your market size potentially, but it's not necessarily a business model by itself. In the streaming, market, you've got subscription services, you've got premium services, you've got the concept of free to play as well. Those are the business models outside of streaming.
Right. And one of the things is a principle that applies actually to subscription actually also applies to streaming. The biggest issue with streaming is the cost to deliver it, whether it's cloud computing cycles, whether it's just the sheer transport. If you have a casual game, transport doesn't really matter much, but if you have major assets, well, the good news is being on a streaming service is going to look like a non-deal. There are many deals out there, which unfortunately, because of confidentiality, we can't discuss, where the streaming service basically is covering all these costs because they simply want to bring people to their platform. And since there are some major streaming services named AWS and Azure, we can either confirm nor deny, but let's put it this way, one of those services is doing this, and maybe both of them, but we can either put it,
Well, the thing is, they're in acquisition mode, right? So they're going to give away their bandwidth, they're going to give away their compute power, all while they're trying to attract developers and customers to their services, the same way subscription services do, right? When they get to scale, however, then you're going to get to that moment that now you're a competitor, you're competing for bandwidth, maybe you're going to be charged for bandwidth, you're going to see the things happening like we see in the video space, where I would imagine at some point the streaming or subscription services are going to create their own content to be in competition with the rest of us who are putting our content on there. So we have a window in both of these cases, as developers, of when we can strike and make the most money, and it's while they're in acquisition and that building mode. Once they're at that point of growth, where they've reached the growth and they're stable, it's going to be tougher for us to make money at that point.
Right. So one of the immediate takeaways is if you want to go in and make a commitment to a streaming service, or you want to count on it for revenue, and you're basically figuring, I'm going to make my money in 1 or 2 years, God bless. But if you're thinking of it as a long-term proposition and you have a heavy asset game, be prepared for the rug to get pulled out of you when all of a sudden all these things you got for free or at almost zero cost suddenly become things that you get charged against.
Or at least make sure you've got that written in your contract.
Sorry, that's a very that's
the business side.
That's gaming the system on the business side. So moving on to the next one. So every year or two, there's a new bright shiny object at Game Developers Conference and so on, and China Joy. This year it was blockchain. Blockchain is also not a business model as most widely deployed, which is a payment solution and is a revenue stream enabler. Allowing people to sell a game secondhand, guaranteeing virtual items. These are all excellent uses. Those are both excellent uses of blockchain, but they aren't about the game itself.
But Eric, I thought lots of people say you can make tons of money from blockchain in games. Well, I think that Eric is right. It's mostly about e-commerce today. I think that probably gaming is one of those industries that's going to figure out how actually blockchain could be a revenue driver in the future. I haven't seen anything that's there yet today, but could we, with this type of a concept, that blockchain represents, and the concept of operating between players, figure out a way that generates money for us as developers? I think so, but we're just not there yet. Today, the implementation is much more of a payment system than it is a business model.
Okay. One of the most successful European CEOs proposed on Facebook recently that blockchain is a solution in search of a problem. I think that's a bit harsh, and I want to say that there is a splendid opportunity. Blockchain is about creating, with ICOs, it's about creating, getting access to capital very quickly. With tokens, it's about creating and sustaining value over time. This is one thing that the game field knows better than, I believe, any other entertainment medium. We have been creating virtual items and creating value going back at least 25 years in online games. There's no coincidence that CCP, the publishers of EVE Online, were the first company to hire a professional economist, someone who had got his PhD and who understood how economies work, in 1999 or 2000. To give you an idea of how long ago that was in digital, eBay hired its first economist somewhere around 96 or 97, and they are entirely based on an economic model. So while we say that there is not an obvious solution, if there's an industry that is equipped to take advantage of blockchain and implement it usefully in games, to build a new type of game form and to make a hell of a lot of money off it, it's the core competencies that we have. And of course, all of you game design people are enormously creative and will come up with brilliant solutions to this.
Yeah, well, I think, as we start to think about winding up here, we look at the types of revenue that you can generate from games, and I would say that it drops into three big categories. There's an acquisition revenue, right? That relates to what does somebody pay you to get your game, and it could be, like some of our games at Ubisoft, $60 to get in the game, or a couple bucks in an app store, or it could actually be free. In that mix. There's engagement revenue. It's what happens with the player while you're continuing on to play the game, whether that be microtransactions or a subscription fee or something else like that. And I would say there's a, maybe not entirely new, but certainly growing quickly, form of observational revenue that's coming, right? When that is, watching gaming. Right? And our market, and when we think about this, is much larger than just the players. And we've certainly all seen the phenomenal growth in terms of spectating overall. And I think that actually could be a business model.
Well, more to the point, that's one where we can give you a number of different examples of it. So we have things called crowdsourcing, which is one way to be able to get. We have things like Patreon, which are, allow you to basically sponsor, just like a medieval Medici, though presumably at a lower scale and by killing less people in the process. And then, but the third one, which is again,
so in each of those cases, you're really talking about charitable gifting, as it were, to the developer or even either charitable to the player, to the developer, or sometimes charitable.
No, but you're creating, again, you're not just saying it's not just tipping. Mm-hmm. It's also saying that you create something valuable enough that the way I'm willing to pay you is this. The third way, which is one that is working at scale at a couple of $100 million, is gifting, which is again that way, and it's working in China. And you know, obviously, Chris and I were saying China's big for F2P. We're telling you, gifting in China may not. It has become, for cultural reasons, it may become the dominant form of payment above F2P. That may not happen over here, but it is going to become a fairly substantial way. And you're seeing it in terms of what streamers get and so on, you know, the people who are YouTube personalities. You are starting to see it in games. What's interesting is that the transactions, we would normally call them microtransactions, but microtransactions mean something in games. So these are nanotransactions. These are literally making contributions as small as fractions of a cent, as small as, you know, as a couple of pennies and so on. And these are going to, you know, for any of you who've done a Kickstarter or a Fig thing, you know that you have to change how you design the game. You do things like you sell, you know, if you subscribe, we'll put your name in it. If Chris Early pays 200 pounds, we'll put his name in it. You now have to think about, you're going to be playing to your audience. And that changes games designs rather dramatically.
Right, and it's not just your game that needs to play to the audience, but you also now need to think about yourself as being an enabler of, in fact, those people who are going to create content and stream your game. Right? How can you make your game more enticing for people to watch, for an influencer or a streamer to, in fact, use the tools that you've built into the game, right, to then broadcast your game, which helps your game, and then gives that streamer a mechanism for generating those tips, that contributional revenue, which then you can potentially take a share in as well. I mean, even at the level, from a game design standpoint, do you think about what was made popular in the movies, like in Hunger Games, allowing the viewers to actually impact the game itself by their gifting, by their sponsorship, or is it just actually rewarding the creator of content of the stream only?
So, in terms of takeaways, obviously rewatch Hunger Games. You only have to watch. You only have to watch the first movie. We're not asking that you watch all three. Then another field to learn from is advertising, which again makes huge amounts of money at scale. In other words, each transaction with a user from advertising, such as Voodoo and Ketchup do, is based on getting fractions of a cent. It will tell you about how to do games to do it. And in terms of a ecosystem to look at, I would look at the Minecraft ecosystem. Most of you may be many of you may be familiar that Minecraft has replaced for young children and tweens, it has replaced the Saturday morning cartoons that we watched when we were growing up. They are setting up a test bed for people to give a great deal of value. And you can see Microsoft/Mojang is now turning to monetize that. We're almost out of time. Again, sorry, this was 45 minutes to an hour's worth of coverage, so we spoke fast. I'm from New York, so I can do that. And we tried to cover a lot of territory. Can we cover maybe one or two questions before we disappear?
So, is premium completely dead? Is there still room for people to make a game and sell it for a flat price in any circumstance?
Well, I hope it's not completely dead, or at least I'll be out of a job soon looking for something else. So, you know, our point is not to say that the existing models are collapsing. I think that it's more about that there are new business models coming, and that in general, I would say that as an industry, you know, from a game design standpoint, revenue optimization is one of the last things that we've traditionally looked at, right? And certainly we've become more skilled at that as an industry when we think about how to optimize in a free-to-play environment, but that's a particular set of design considerations for that business model. And the point of today was to say, think about other business models that are coming, because we all know folks who got in early and managed to figure out the magic early on free-to-play, and they had a great run. Right? And now the market's significantly more crowded. It's tougher to get in. There's a lot more competition. Like, it would be great to be that guy getting in early on the subscription services, for example, right? And to have a game that's tuned for that while you're helping them build their service, because that's, I think, when the heyday happens. As we said earlier, at some point it's going to become less appealing there.
It was a good question. One of the things we put on the cutting room floor is the existing models are not going to go away. So, for instance, the premium game, FIFA Soccer, is still sold at a premium, but you watched over the years. First, we're always going to be premium. Then, well, maybe we'll do virtual items. Well, then maybe we'll do some free-to-play elements. That's the process that's happening. So sorry that we didn't cover that, and thank you for asking that question. The most important takeaway is if you are early, but not too early. If you're three, as the venture capital industry says, if you're 3 or 4 years too early, you're indistinguishable from wrong. But one of the reasons we gave you examples that these are actually playing out over here is to say we are now at early stages for these ones, and if you choose to go after these streams, there are opportunities. Several people are going to make at least small, if not large, fortunes.
Well, I'd say it's always good to be early, but of course I had to say that. And I don't want us to be late because our time is up and then we need to get ready for the next speaker. So thanks very much for coming today.
Thank you all.